I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, one nation, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thanks so much, everybody, for being here. Thanks to Wes for organising this, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces here. Can everybody hear me down the back all right? Can you understand the southern accent okay? I worry about that. Yeah, very big south, yeah. Well, you know, it's not how I normally dress, but as Wes said, my clothes are in Rochester, New York. I got off the plane 20 minutes ago, so when I was supposed to be here last night, so it's been a bit of a rigmarole. But I'm going to talk about the church tonight, and I'll touch a little bit on Minnesota politics too, but mainly the church. But I just want to say a couple of things before I start. You know, people always ask me why I care about the United States. And I've just been back in New Zealand, my home country, saw my 89-year-old dad. Well, my mum and dad were little when World War II was raging. And they were in fear of invasion by the Japanese. And if it hadn't been for the sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway, I might not be here. So it's very personal to me, so thank you. And other thing I'll say, has anybody heard of Ron DeSantis, Governor of Florida? And he's got his hands full at the moment, and that hurricane is coming right up my harbour where I live. So, but never mind, it'll be all right. Well, I might say a couple of nice things about Ron later. They love him like a chocolate in Florida, they really do. And you deserve one here, a governor of that caliber. But I got to say my relationship, in the interest of transparency, I want to reveal my relationship to Governor DeSantis, so you know where I'm coming from. You see, Governor DeSantis' family comes from Philadelphia, and my wife's family comes from Philadelphia. And 40 years ago, my wife's aunt dated Ron DeSantis' father's cousin. So we're practically family. So just so you know. All right? Okay, it's out there now. Right. Well, I want to talk about the church and the enemies within it. But I want to start with a love story. And this is not your typical Romeo and Juliet story, but I think you'll see where I'm going eventually. I got a friend who's a military officer, special forces, led his troops into combat many times, has bullet wounds in his body to prove it. A few years ago, he made one of the bravest and toughest decisions he ever made in his life, and it was in his own home. So he had a 16-year-old son. This is a good Christian family. He had a 16-year-old son who was smoking marijuana every day. And no matter what they did, they couldn't get him to stop. He was just go up in his room, he'd smoke dope all day. And Dad said, look, son, you've got to stop this. This is not acceptable in our house. If you don't stop this, I'll kick you out of home. And his mother would say, no, we can't do that. We've got to get him through this. We've got to be here for him. We've got to help him through this. Well, nothing was working. And one day, Dad said, that's it. He gets his son, puts him in the back of his car, takes him down to the local shopping mall, puts him out on the pavement and says, son, this is your home until you learn to love your family more than you love marijuana. Bye. And he drove away from that, choking back tears and praying all the way home. Okay? Well, 5 days they heard nothing. Just 5 horrible, horrible days. On the 5th day, they get a knock on the door. They go to the door, and here's the junior. He said, Dad, can I please come home? I'll never smoke that junk again. And he kept his word. He never did. Now he's active in the church. He's married, got a business, got a family. Everything turned out okay. But here's the point. It was clear the mother loved the son as much as you could love anyone. But her love had no impact on him. None whatsoever. It took the love of the father to get something done. And this is the thing, everybody who has been in a family knows this. We need two kinds of love in a family. You need the love of the mother who will nurture you and always be there for you. She's there at your high school graduation and when you ship out to war and when you come home. She's going to bandage your knee and tell you nursery rhymes. She's always going to be there. But you also need the love of the father who will boot your little backside if you disrespect your mother, who will hold his son to account, who will teach his daughter to be a man and his son to be a man. Sorry, it's just... Even I'm getting infected by this stuff now. And he'll teach his son to be a man and his daughter to be a lady, who will take his son fishing, to the ball game and to the woodshed when necessary. We all know that every family, when you have a strong male figure and a strong female figure, that is the best possible option for children, is it not? Yeah. Well, what kind of love do you think is most dominant in most American churches now? Masculine love or feminine love? Yeah. By a country mile, isn't it? Yeah. There's very little holding to account. There's very little onward Christian soldiers marching as to war. There's very little masculine holding to account. This is the way it's got to be. You've got to meet certain standards, and if you don't, you can take a hike. There's very little of that. You know, the old Catholic priests in the old days would put boxing gloves on the boys and teach them how to box and look after themselves. There's old World War II pastors and Korean War pastors who were tough, and they expected a lot of their people. So if you look at America today, you look at the education system, even the military now, which kind of love is most dominant in those institutions? It's the feminine love, isn't it? Masculinity is toxic now. You know, the love that built this country, that built the universities and tamed the frontiers and stormed the beaches at Normandy, that's a bad thing now. And we're all suffering because we've allowed that to happen. So, we see this in the churches, and we see the impact of it in society, but go back a little bit. How did this get here? Has anybody heard of the concept of situation ethics? Okay, quite a few of you. If you haven't heard of it, you're probably living by it. Okay, that's the problem. Now, situation ethics means when you make a moral decision, you don't reference the Ten Commandments or any fixed form of morality. You don't reference any revealed divine morality. You look at the situation around you. You look at all of the circumstances, then you make the most loving decision possible. Now, what kind of love do you think is the standard that is used in that? The mother's love. Okay? Now, where did this come from? Well, here's some examples how it might work. So you might have a 26-year-old woman. She's in a PhD program at Harvard. She's invested $250,000 in her education. She's got a great future lined up. She can do a lot of good. And then she falls pregnant. And the boyfriend's not really who she wants to be a long-term partner with. And she's thinking, well, I got this child here. This is really going to wreck my education. I'm probably going to have to drop out of the PhD program. This is going to impact me financially for years. It means I can't do the great things I had planned. I'm not going to be able to give this child the stable upbringing that I really want to do it. Maybe the most loving thing to do would be to have an abortion. You know, your family's starving. You're out of work. You love your family. Of course you love your family. And they're hungry. And there's a big supermarket just down the road, full of food. Surely it's acceptable to go and take a little bit of the food, you know. I'll pay for it later. Surely that's acceptable because that's a loving thing to do. Every pastor who thinks, well, I've got a new church, I've got a big mortgage. I really love my flock. It's growing slowly. It's getting there. I love my people. But I notice when I preach some of the tougher parts of the Bible, You know, I talk about hell, I talk about sin, I talk about the wages of sin. I talk about a lot of the Old Testament stuff. I notice that some of my people get very uncomfortable. And some of them don't actually come back when I talk about this kind of stuff. Maybe the more loving thing to do would be to soften the message a little bit. Maybe talk about the nicer parts of the Bible. You know, the loving parts of Jesus. Not so much not so much the fire and brimstone parts of the Old Testament. Maybe if I soften the message, I can bring more people into the church. And then they can learn about Jesus. And that'll be the best thing. And by the way, I can pay my mortgage too. That is situation ethics. And it's 100% wrong. 100%, but it's the dominant moral system in America today. That is how most moral decisions are made in this country. You know, it's not whether it's right or wrong, it's what the outcome will be. And who gets to decide the outcome? You do. So it's basically a way of doing what you want to do and giving it a moral veneer. What was convenient for you at the time and making it somehow moral. That's what situation ethics is. Now, where did this come from? Because it wasn't always the way we did things. See, back in the old days, you know, you could be the biggest drunken reprobate in town, most horrible person in town, but at least you knew the Ten Commandments, and you knew you were breaking them. You at least respected them, even if you didn't keep them. You knew what the moral standard was. Well, in 1966, a book came out called exactly that, Situation Ethics, written by a man called Joseph Fletcher, a professor of divinity at the Episcopalian Divinity School at Harvard University. One of the most respected and influential Protestant Christians of the era. He lectured all over the world. He wrote multiple books. He was a public intellectual, very, very respected man. Quoted in Newsweek and Time on a regular basis. And this book, Situation Ethics, took the Christian world by storm and America by storm. Because it said, we're in a new age now. The old morality of the Ten Commandments is not up to the complex decisions we need to make in today's world. We need a new form of morality. And this was a perfect time. This was a perfect storm. Because you had the greatest generation who'd been through World War II and the Depression were never going to let their kids suffer like they did, and they spoiled them rotten. And then you had Dr. Spock, the leftist, telling every American parent, be your child's friend. Don't discipline them. Don't stifle their creativity. Be their buddy. And then you had the Frankfurt School, you know, make love, not war, you know, all this sort of left-wing stuff that was coming in, all together with the hippie movement. And America was looking for a new morality, something that could make what they wanted to do, the self-indulgence, make it somehow moral. So this situation ethics was perfect. It fit the moment and it took off. But it was just a huge movement from 66 onwards. Well, after he'd done his damage, Joseph Fletcher left the church and publicly declared himself as an atheist. And then he set up an organisation devoted to euthanasia for handicapped children up to the age of 10 years old. But you trace his history back. He was at Berkeley in the 1920s. But he didn't graduate Berkeley because in those days in Berkeley you had to do ROTC to graduate. You had to be an officer. You had to do military training to graduate from Berkeley at that time, and he refused to do it. Then he went out to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he worked in several Communist Party fronts. Then he went to Alabama, where he worked with the Sharecroppers Union, another Communist Party operation. Then he went to Harvard and started to work his way up through the church hierarchy in Boston there. His wife helped Margaret Sanger establish Planned Parenthood too, by the way. So He worked his way up. He became more and more of a well-known public intellectual, Christian intellectual. But he was also a leader of the American Soviet Friendship Society, a major Communist Party front. He was a leader of the World Peace Council, which was set up by Joseph Stalin to agitate for the weakening of the US military so the communists could take this country down. He was identified as attending Communist Party meetings in Boston on a regular basis, sworn under oath. I saw him at the meetings. He was a Marxist-Leninist. He was always a communist. But he pretended to be a churchman, a man of the cloth. And he transformed American morality. Completely transformed the way we think about morality in this country. Did massive, massive damage to the social fabric of this country. Now, he couldn't have done that if he was a Labour Union official. He couldn't have done that if he was marching through the streets of Rochester waving a red flag. He could only do it by having the respectability of the church behind him. That's how he did the damage. The very first Communist Party front in America was the Methodist Federation for Social Action. Because the communists understood if you want to take down America, you need to be in the church. Think about this. You know, this country was the very first nation in the world founded on the principle that man's rights come from God, not from the government. You don't have constitutional rights, folks. You have God-given rights protected by a constitution. Very critical point. Now, do you think this wacky idea that man's rights come from God might have offended every dictator on the planet? Every divine, because before that it was divine right of kings. The king ruled and he spoke to God. And he told every family, you've got to give every third daughter to my court, every fourth son to my army, 20% of your grain harvest every year to my coffers. And if you disobey me, you are disobeying God. Because it always happened to be that God agreed with the king. Well, your founding fathers had a very different idea. You know, they believed, and that's why they fled Europe. They didn't fight the American Revolution because the tea tax was too high. They fought because of religious liberty. Because they had fled Europe to establish 13 colonies, all run by different Christian denominations. Because they had fled the state churches of Europe, where if you were of the wrong faith, you could be persecuted or even killed. So they braved the conditions and sailed across this ocean, starved. Most of their families died, but they eventually established 13 colonies. When they saw King George starting to break the agreements with the colonies, starting to take away the rights of the colonies, they knew that they were going to be dominated by the state church of England. They knew that everything they'd fled Europe for was going to come to America. So that is why most of your revolutionary commanders were pastors. The famous black robe regiments. Bible in one hand and the long rifle in the other. They fought that war more than anything else over the principle of religious liberty. But you don't hear that in the textbooks because that's too complimentary to Christianity to say that. So, the very first Communist front was the Methodist Federation for Social Action. Well, in the 1920s, the Communist Party USA started in 1919, but they had socialist movements way before that. They started to send their people back into the churches. You're a communist. You're one of us. You're a comrade. We want the revolution. Go back to the Baptists. You're brought up Episcopalian. Go into the Episcopalian church. You're brought up Jewish. Go to the synagogue. They sent their people into the religious institutions not so they could learn from them, so they could use the influence and the money and the respectability of organized religion to promote socialism. It was the best mechanism in the country. Any communist would understand this. And so you started to get a big influx of communists into the churches. And the Catholics thought, no, we're okay, don't worry about us, because there's no way you can infiltrate the Catholic Church, because to do that, you have to take a lifelong vow of celibacy and become a priest, and then a bishop, then an archbishop, then a cardinal, then a pope. What communist is going to do that, right? Well, Bella Dodd, who testified before the US Congress, was a Catholic, became a communist, went back to her Catholic faith, testified about the large numbers of young American communists being put into the Catholic priesthood. And I'm betting many of them were homosexual. Well, why would they worry about a lifelong vow of celibacy when they're in the seminaries with a whole bunch of people just like them? So the Catholic Church got a double whammy. It got the left-wing drift, it got the pedophile priest problem, all because of this infiltration. Well, by the time the late 30s had rolled around, you had hundreds of Protestants, pastors, and churchmen and bishops supporting communist causes. I had a friend called Herb Romerstein. He was the country's youngest Communist Party member at 17. He abandoned communism, fought as a Marine in the Korean War as a patriot, and then he became the US Senate's chief investigator into communism in this country, the encyclopedia of communism. And he said to me, Trevor, he said, in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, the biggest suckers who signed up for the most Communist Party fronts, who promoted the most Communist Party petitions, who just promoted the most Communist Party causes were Protestant clergymen. They would get into everything. Peace this, peace that, social justice this, whatever. They were there, right into it. Well, this really aggravated a lot of grassroots Christians because they could see this is, because these communists in the churches, they would preach 90% communism with 10% Christianity. And people just left. A lot of them went into the evangelical churches, a lot of them just left Christianity in total, or just worshipped at home. By the 1940s, the mainstream Protestant churches in this country had affiliated with the National Council of Churches, which was then affiliated to the World Council of Churches, which was run by the Russian Orthodox Church, which was run by the Soviet KGB. They used to call it the Communist Party at Prayer. So this carried on into the 60s, right into the 60s. Then the 70s came along. And by this time, America was changing. You had the hippie movement was coming in, the Jesus freak movement was coming in. But you had the Vietnam War. And a lot of young men, a lot of young leftists and Marxists were facing the draft. They were going to be forced to go and fight against their communist friends in the Vietnam War. So what did they do? They took deferments and went to Bible college. So they could actually work for socialism inside the church rather than fight against communism in the jungles of Vietnam. In the 1970s, the evangelicals were starting to get more political in the 1970s. They'd seen the left-wing drift of the mainstream churches, and they were moving more towards the Ronald Reagans and moving into the moral majority. They were very pro-Israel. They were very pro-America, very patriotic, because they saw that somebody who really understands the Bible and the sense of responsibility and personal responsibility in the Bible. You'd have to want to live in a free country, wouldn't you? What is the point of having free will if you don't live in a free country? So naturally, these people tended to be very politically conservative. They supported the Constitution. They wanted their schools run soundly. They wanted America to be America because they understood that the American Constitution was based out of the Bible. Representative government came out of the Bible. Where did representative government come from? It was from Mosaic law. When Moses was leading the people through the desert, he was besieged by complainers and suggestions. People coming to him all the time, we've got to do this, Moses. We've got to do that. We've got to do this. He said, go amongst yourselves and choose representatives. Send 10 people to me a day, not 100. So they understood this. And so the evangelicals were moving to support the Christian, the conservative movement. They saw a natural ally in the conservative movement. Well, in 1973, there was an attempt to build a left-wing evangelical movement. It was done by Ron Sider, Richard Mao, who'd been in SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, people like Jim Wallace, who later became Obama's, religious, spiritual advisor. There was a left-wing segment of evangelicalism who set up this thing called the Chicago Declaration in 1973. And it was all about diminishing America's role in the world. America was too dominant. We needed more wealth redistribution on an international scale. We needed disarmament. We needed all this social policy stuff. It was basically communism with a sort of Christian veneer. And it didn't really fire because people were getting to know Ronald Reagan then. This was the beginning of the real push of evangelicals into the conservative movement. But this movement didn't go away. They basically went into the Bible colleges and the seminaries and to academia and started to rise up through Wheaton College and all of these institutions to get professorships, become heads of departments. This network kept expanding. By the 90s, these people ran many of these institutions. And this is how communists work, leftists work. They say, how do they take these institutions over? How do they take over a labour union? How do they take over a university? How do they take over the Democratic Party, the DFL? Well, the DFL was set up by the Communist Party in this state. The Farmer Labour Party, as it was. And so what do? It's very simple. You get 3 or 4 guys into Wheaton College, for instance, and they work their way up till they become a head of a department. And then they only hire other leftists. And they get rid of any conservative. And in 20 years, you can take over a whole college. You can take over a whole institution. You just have to start with 2 or 3 people. You get, see, a conservative professor or college dean will hire a liberal if they're good at their job. But a liberal will never hire a conservative. So over a period of 15, 20 years, you drive all the conservatives out and you only hire liberals, and then you teach all the new people coming through the new way of doing things. In 20 years, you've transformed the whole institution. So, but there was still a few. The communists had a big problem still, because by the early 2000s, well, by the 80s, the left had got control of many of these institutions. By the 90s, they controlled almost all of the universities in the country. They had the Democratic Party. They had Hollywood. They had most of the mainstream media. They had most of the institutions in this country. They were starting to infiltrate the military at that point. So this was the problem they had. We've got control of virtually every major institution. We're teaching the new kids coming out all about socialism and Marxism. We don't call it that, but that's what we're teaching them. But we're having problems electorally because we've got these millions of crazy conservative evangelicals and Baptists who go and vote for these darn Ronald Reagans and Donald Trumps. And they set us back 20 years. What are we going to do about these evangelicals? So in the early 2000s, and I'll mention a few names here. We put these names. Look, I want to say this. We name a lot of very prominent Christians in our movie. Every single one of them we did the Matthew 18 thing to. We went to every one of them and asked for an interview. Every one. Not one of them would do it. We had over 100 whistleblowers come to us from Campus Crusade for Christ, from all these big seminaries and Bible colleges. Senior level people, lower level people. Only about 10% of them come on camera, but it's all in there. This is over 2-hour movie, and it will shock you, folks. But so what had happened is, in 2005, Tim Keller, and some of you probably got Tim Keller's books on your bookshelf. He writes some good stuff. But he set up the Gospel Coalition, and it was originally had some conservatives on board, like Bodie Barkham and a few others, but they soon left. And he brought in Mark Dever, he brought in Tabili Inwale, who used to be called Mark Burns, who was a pro-Soviet communist who became a black Muslim and then a Christian, but still talks exactly like he did when he was a Marxist. Brought all of these people in to start bringing left-wing Marxism into the evangelical movement. And they teamed up with Campus Crusade for Christ. And they got involved in World Vision and Christianity Today. And they started to bring in critical race theory. And they started to talk about white privilege and social justice. They brought in the whole of life argument. This is Tim Keller's argument. Look, you don't vote Democrat because they're the party of abortion, right? Well, you've got to get past that because, see, if the Democrats can introduce their social policies which will alleviate poverty, poverty is the main cause of abortion. So therefore, by voting Democrat, you can actually reduce abortion. This is the logic. This is the argument they bring. If you're pro-life, you've got to be pro-life for the whole of life. You've got to support social policies that support families. You've got to support welfare policies that keep people on the government dole their whole lives, because that's what it really means to be pro-life, according to these folks. They won't challenge you and say, we're really for abortion. They'll say, yeah, we hate abortion too, but you've got to be consistent and you've got to be a socialist. You've got to give people government money their whole life. That's what pro-life really means. These are the kind of arguments they're spinning. Now, who's heard of the concept white privilege? You've all got it, every single one of you. You might be on food stamps, I don't know. But you have white privilege, no matter what your income level, you have white privilege over the black football player earning $40 million a year. Right? Well, this is what white privilege means. The concept was invented by Ted Allen and Noel Ignatieff of the Communist Party USA. The Communist Party USA was too moderate for them, so they joined a pro-Chinese Communist Party called the Provisional Organizing Committee. But see, this is the normal communist argument is this. The working class is being suppressed and by the capitalist class. The 1% is suppressing the 99%. Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, that was their Marxist argument. And so we've got to have a workers' revolution which will overthrow the capitalists so we can redistribute the wealth. That's the classic Marxist argument, right? But it didn't work very well in America because you didn't have very much of a class structure here. Here you can start out dirt poor and end up filthy rich. You can start out filthy rich and end up dirt poor too, which is how it should be, you know? It's exactly how it should be. But race is always with you. It doesn't matter how rich you are or whatever, you're still oppressed because of your race. So now the communist argument is, it's not the working class will rise and take the wealth of the capitalists. It is now the oppressed peoples of colour will stand up and take the wealth and privilege away from the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. It's still Marxism, but it's applied to race, not class. So you've probably seen photographs of the old Chinese Cultural Revolution of the 60s, where they'd have somebody with a sign round their neck getting abused by a whole crowd of people because their father had 2 pigs when everybody else only had 1, because their father had a fruit stand at the local market and nobody else had one. because they were the capitalists, and these were to raise the consciousness of the people about class struggle. See the dirty capitalist, he's the reason you're poor. Well, now it is, see the white man, that's the reason you're oppressed. You are suffering under racism in this country. The reason you're poor is because of racism. The system is tilted against you. The only way you can stop racism is to unite the peoples of colour together with the white anti-racists to overthrow the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. That is the argument that's being used now. Does anybody see this anywhere? This is pure Marxism. It's 100% Marxism from Ted Allen and Noel Ignatieff. And it's in churches all over the country now. Black Lives... The reason we did this movie is because my friend Judd Saul, who we did the first movie with, Enemies Within, about the government, put his daughter... He was going to a little independent Baptist church in northeastern Iowa. And it was okay. It was a good church. And they got a new woke pastor. And he starts talking about critical race theory. He starts talking about white privilege and class and social justice. And Judd went to the elders and said, why are we allowing this Marxist to be teaching our kids for? And they weren't interested. They did nothing. And the final straw was when Black Lives Matter, which is a Chinese communist operation, by the way, were marching through town. This pastor got everybody else out to go give them pizzas. And Judd saw this is it. I better talk to Trevor. We better research this. So it took us 3 years. But see, we hear about the woke church, right? The church, you got a woke church, you got a woke business. Well, those people at those Chinese cultural things, they were becoming awake. Their consciousness was being arisen. Their consciousness was being raised of the issues of class oppression. Look, he's a dirty capitalist. That's why you're poor. Raising the consciousness of class struggle. Well, now they raise the consciousness of LGBTQ oppression, of white privilege, of systemic racism. It's all Marxism. What they called it consciousness raising, we would call it brainwashing. Now they call it wokeism. You are awake to the issues of LGBTQ oppression. You've woken up to the class, to the social justice issues in society. This is Marxism, people. It is revolutionary Marxism designed to destroy this country. But it's in churches all over the country. It's in businesses now. It's in schools. It's in the military now. Deeply embedded, and it is all Marxism. We give a couple of examples of how this works in practice in the movie. Give a couple of them. In 2015, InterVarsity, which is completely woke, Crew is completely woke, Campus Crusade for Christ, which is once a wonderful organisation. Don't send them a check at Christmas, please. Look, you listen to one of their webinars, they say God at the beginning and Jesus at the end with 2 hours of Marxism in the middle. Completely Marxist. But anyway, so there was this big InterVarsity conference in St. Louis, Missouri in 2015. And it was the Midwest, thousands of young kids there, almost all white because it's the Midwest. And the main teacher, the main keynote speaker was Michelle Higgins, a young black pastor from St. Louis, Missouri. And she gets up there and harangues these kids that their mission from God is to end white privilege. This is your mission. This is the 11th commandment. This is your mission from God, end white privilege. They would have walked out there thinking, I don't need to go to Africa now. I need to do a mission trip to South America. I need to end white privilege in America. It could be on food stamps, but they got to end white privilege. Well, they were not told that Michelle Higgins was a member of the Organization for Black Struggle. That is the group that burnt Ferguson, Missouri to the ground in 2014. It is a front for Liberation Road, the pro-Chinese Communist Party that started Black Lives Matter. They were not told this. They were being taught straight up Chinese Maoist communism aimed to destroy this country and thinking it's biblical. We give another example. There's a church very near to where I live. I hope it's still there by the end of the weekend. In Naples, Florida. The First Baptist Church started out with 17 people, grew to 2,000 people. Now, this is a conservative area. That county voted 92% for Trump, right? This is a very conservative area. This is a very conservative church. And they grew to 2,000 people, and their pastor retired. So the Southern Baptists, they started a search for a new pastor. And in the Baptist church, you've got to vote 85% to confirm a new pastor, I think it is. And so the Southern Baptists, the ERLC, the Southern Baptists, Kevin Ezell and all these people, they recommended a candidate they should get, Marcus Hayes, a young black man. So they did videos promoting, you'll love Marcus, you'll love Marcus, he's going to be a perfect fit for your church. Yeah, I know, it's Freudian slip. And they did all this, and they really tried to push this Marcus Hayes on the church. They had 100 people they were interviewing, but Marcus Hayes had to be the one. Well, when they voted on Marcus Hayes only got 83% of the vote. Because Marcus Hayes was woke. As woke can be, though he had scrubbed a lot of his woke stuff from Twitter and Facebook, but they did some research. And the Southern Baptists came down on this church. You're a bunch of racists. The only reason you rejected Marcus Hayes because you didn't want a black man running your church. This is disgusting. They mounted a big campaign, and the 17 founders of that church were thrown out of their own church. Marcus Hayes didn't get the job, but he went to a church instead in Dallas, and I get complaints from them how he's now wrecking their church with his woke Marxist stuff. So this is how they're working, folks. Virtually all of the Bible colleges you send your kids to now are woke. They are just as bad as the secular colleges, maybe worse. You've got to toe the woke line or you do not graduate. We got people, we showed people, we got kicked out of school because they wouldn't toe the woke line. One young man was lined up in a room with over 20 staff members around him, haranguing him about his conservative views. He got kicked out of the program there. Here's a good one. Bobby Lopez from Texas. Now, Bobby Lopez was a young gay guy, right? Was in the homosexual lifestyle till about 28. And then he got saved. And he got a wife, and he got a family, and he wanted to tell his story. How you can be saved from homosexuality through Christ. You'd think this would be a popular message, right? But the Baptist Church got rid of him because they did not want this message out there. They want gay-friendly Christianity now. So this is how it's working, people. Has anybody gone to a church that was a little bit woke in this area? Have you heard of any churches in this community that are a little bit woke? Mm-hmm. Well, they are. And see, so, they're all over the place now. But the horrible thing is, they have control of the Bible colleges. So the young pastors that come out now, they're not going to love the American Constitution. They're not going to love Israel. They're not going to love the free enterprise system. They're going to love Bernie Sanders and socialism. Look, a friend of mine, he said, I was at Dallas Dallas Theological Seminary, one of the rock-solid seminaries. He said, first day I was there, he's an army veteran. He went to the seminary. First day I went out there, the whole car park was full of Bernie Sanders stickers. So you think about it from a communist point of view, from a purely secular point of view. If you can infiltrate the evangelicals and the Baptists and turn them to the left, That's it for America, folks. Because that's the big conservative voting base. You can turn that to the left, you'll have Hillary Clinton's coming out your ears. You'll never have another Donald Trump. You'll never have another conservative president, ever. And this is the aim. These people don't care about the church. They don't care about the gospel. They don't care about Jesus. They just want socialist power. And the church is the vehicle for delivering it. Because the church has money and influence and respectability. People listen to their pastors. So you've got to get the movie, folks, because we put it out there because, see, look, every week hundreds of people wake up and they say, look, my life is just drifting. I'm just bereft. I need to get a spiritual foundation. I need to go to church, or I need to go back to church. So they go to the nearest church, and do they hear about the Bible or the Old Testament? They'll hear a lot about their white privilege. They'll hear a whole bunch about global warming, but nothing about sub-global warming. They'll hear a whole bunch of woke stuff, and they'll either think, wow, this is really Christianity, or they'll think this is a complete waste of time and go home. But thousands of people are being drawn into this every single week. And pastors won't say anything about this because the unwritten rule is you're never allowed to criticize another pastor. These people are not pastors. They are socialists. They're leading people straight to hell. And by not standing up and saying this, you are complicit. If you know your neighbouring pastor is preaching complete heresy, is preaching Marxism disguised as Christianity, and you allow that to happen, leading people astray, and you say nothing, are you any better? See, here's some of my arguments, because there's a lot of Christians in this country who say, oh no, we are way too pure for politics and stuff like that, and we don't get involved in the civic affairs, all this. And well, here's a few arguments. See, to save this country, we need to save the churches. Andrew Breitbart always used to say, politics is downstream from culture. The culture affects the politics. If your politics is a sewer, that's because your culture is. But culture is downstream from religion. The churches affect the culture, or the lack of church affects the culture, which then impacts the politics. So if your politics are a complete mess, and your culture is turning into a sewer, what is that saying about your churches? In the old days it was very simple, Everybody, we're given 3 institutions to govern us by God. 3 God-given institutions. We're given the church, we're given the family, and we're given civil government. If anybody disputes that civil government is a godly institution, read your Old Testament. The whole thing is about kings and princes and wise rulers and putting walls up around your city so you don't get slaughtered by the barbarians. It's about national security. It's about civil governance. That's where the laws were set. Civil government is a godly institution. It's a responsibility of godly people to be leaders in their own community. But we've been told, no, we shouldn't do that. Separate politics from the state. Well, who's telling you that? It's your enemies, folks. The people the Constitution is founded out of the Bible. It's what made America great, but Christians shouldn't be involved in it. Where's the logic in that? If we're told to love, here's an argument I've used with pastors. If we're told to love God and thy neighbour as thyself, so you're a pastor and your next door neighbour is starving. They got no food, right? And you've got a pantry full of food. And you do nothing to help your neighbour. Are you really a Christian?
Nope.
So your town has been flooded. The river's broken the stop banks. And everybody's down there manning the pumps and putting up sandbags, but you sit at home all day praying. Are you really a good Christian? Are you really? So your country, with a constitution inspired out of the Bible, is in deep trouble. The country that has done more to spread the gospel around the world than any other, has built more churches and hospitals and businesses around the world than any other, more schools, has saved more people from tyranny than any other, has done more good in the world than any other. That country is on the verge of collapse. And you believe you have zero responsibility for saving it or passing it on to your children or grandchildren. And you call yourself a Christian. Amen. Can you really say that? I've been given this great country. I was put in this great country. The greatest country the world has ever seen. It's in deep trouble, but God put me here to do nothing about it. He gave me a brain. He gave me hands. He gave me a voice. But He wants me to do nothing to save this country. Well, it's God's will that it's all turning to garbage, right? Well, okay, your 3-year-old granddaughter's drowning in the swimming pool. Do you jump in and save her, or do you say, oh, that's God's will? What do? Absolutely you do. There is responsibility on Christians to restrain evil, to fight evil. That is a Christian responsibility. Amen. So, there's another argument. Well, here's tell me if I'm too harsh here. Before World War II, there was only one group in Germany that could have stopped the Nazis. They had the numbers and the moral authority to stand up to Hitler and say no. And that was the German churches. Right? And what did they do? Did they stand up against Hitler? Nope. 1 or 2 did. Very notable exceptions. Most of them became good Nazi Christians. They put swastikas in their churches. Hitler said, you look after men's souls, let me look after Germany. And what did that lead to? Death. The slaughter of hundreds, tens of millions of people. Tens of millions. We've all heard the famous story, and it may not even be true, but it illustrates the point. The famous story of the little church in Germany during the war on a railway siding. And the people are all praying one Sunday morning, they're singing and whatever, and a boxcar train pulls up outside, and there's boxcars in the back. And they hear screaming from the boxcars, we're thirsty, give us water, help us, save us, save us. Jews going to the concentration camps. And what did those German Christians do? They sang louder. Is that loving thy neighbour as thyself? So the world was led into war because the German Christians didn't stand up. And who saved it all? It was young American Christian boys from Minnesota and Ohio and Nebraska and Pennsylvania and Texas who left their farms, left their factory jobs, left their college, put on uniforms just out of high school, put on uniforms and picked up guns and charged in the face of German machine guns on the beaches at Normandy, who went across the Pacific fighting malaria, fighting the Japanese for year after year to sort out the mess left by the German Christians. When the day comes of account, people, some of those German Christians, I'm sure they were wonderful people. I'm sure they would have invited you to their house and fed you. I'm sure they prayed every day. I'm sure they studied their Bible every day. I'm sure they never stole. They were faithful. I'm sure they were wonderful people. But when the day came to make us stand, what did they do? So the day of account, who would you rather be? Would you rather be one of those German Christians who was a good Christian all their life except for once? Or would you rather be an 18-year-old boy from Nebraska who died on the beaches at Normandy? Who would you rather be, folks? Who do you think honoured God more? The courage. Heard a story the other day. He said this captain was on one of the barges going to Normandy, and his troops, they were terrified. You know, these are 19-year-old kids. And he said, boys, there's two kinds of people on this beach. There's the dead and those who are about to die. Let's go. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine your nephew is in high school now, about to embark on that? But they did it because they believed in this nation. Most of them were Christian, or at least partially Christian. At least they had a Christian heritage. See, what makes people stand up and tell the truth is, you know, to save this nation now, we need people who tell the truth uncompromisingly. And what gives you the courage to tell the truth? You need courage. And what gives you courage? Faith gives you courage. If you're worried about your courage, if you're scared of stuff, check your faith. Because if you have your eye on eternity, why are you scared of the school board? Why are you scared of the IRS? There's bigger things to worry about, are there not?
Yes.
But by the way, it doesn't really matter. All this is irrelevant because we're all going to get raptured on Thursday, aren't we?
That's supposed to be around the 24th.
And I don't want to mock anybody's beliefs. I don't know when the end of the world comes. It's going to come one day, but it could be Tuesday, it could be 1,000 years. We are told to occupy till he comes, right? So I say to people who say this to me, well, look, it's all in God's hands, it's coming to an end soon, you know, we might as well not do anything. I say, okay, well, when are you going to stop paying your mortgage? Okay, you're stopping paying your mortgage on Tuesday, eh? When are you going to stop mowing your lawn? And when do you stop changing your underwear?
Thursdays.
Because only when you prove to me that you are that dead set, you know when the world's going to end because you know better than God, right? That you get the chance to make a decision on when your responsibilities end. Because we have civic responsibilities to the last second. Our job is to restrain evil. Orderly government is a Christian institution which restrains and limits evil so that good people and free people may prosper. We have a responsibility to the very last second, and none of us get to decide when that last second is. Now, I just saw Christianity obliterated in Iraq. ISIS just wiped every church out that they could. They slaughtered people, horrible tortures, beheadings, crucifixions, the whole lot. Wiped out Christianity in the whole country. Did you hear any reports that any of those Iraqi Christians were raptured? So that means that God must love American Christians more than Iraqi Christians, right? Because they had to suffer for their faith, but we don't have to suffer here. Because we're just going to get lifted out of all of this. We allowed that to happen because we allowed Barack Obama to get elected, who led the world into the chaos that we see today. We allowed that to happen. But we're going to get spared the consequences while all those dark-skinned Christians are going to have to suffer. Sorry about that. Why do we get to think we're going to have some privileged position when we allowed this to happen by our negligence, our laziness? I would rather be an Iraqi Christian who got slaughtered for their faith than an American Christian who had 3 cars and a great lifestyle and has never done anything to put their faith, anything to really challenge evil in this country. You know, the pastor, what's a pastor? A pastor is a shepherd, right? That's an analogy that's often used. So a shepherd has a crook, right? The big thing. What's a crook for? A crook is to discipline the sheep, keep the flock in line. There's an element of discipline there. but it's also to beat away the wolves, to protect the flock. Are there any wolves out there right now going after your kids and your communities? So if your pastor is not beating away the wolves and helping you, leading you to beat away the wolves, are they really living their responsibility as a pastor?
Nope. That's right.
So, well, I'm only here to preach the gospel. I would say you're there to lead people in living a gospel life, and that is every area of life, including your civic responsibilities, confronting evil, standing up for truth, regardless of what it costs you, as thousands and millions of Christian martyrs have done before. Why did first century Christians get fed to the lions, but you get to live in a house with 3 cars and enjoy all the amenities of modern America? Why do you get to do that when other Christians have suffered horrible fates for standing up for what they believe in? But this country is about to go down the gurgler and bring the whole Western world and the whole world with it, but you think you have zero responsibility for trying to do something about it. Am I being too harsh here, folks?
No.
So this is why we did the movie, people, because people have to we think it gives people a great understanding of what real Christianity is. We're not getting all denominational about it. You know, we can all fight about different facets and when the tribulation's going to come or whatever, but we all agree on certain points. And all of Christianity is under attack now. All of it. Real Christianity. And that means the end of America if it's allowed to continue. So whether you're Christian, atheist, Jewish, whatever you are, if you believe in America, you need to be worried about what's happening to the churches. Because the churches are the backbone of this nation. They are what made this nation great. They are what keep it together. They are what is the moral guide star of this nation. And it's being lost in front of our eyes. And we can expect chaos if it's allowed to continue. That's what we've seen everywhere else this has happened. And we can't think it's going to be different here. So we did the movie to give people a real look at who's doing this, why they're doing it, naming names, but also what Christians can do to actually to strengthen themselves so they can call out the wokeness, so they know what it really is. So they can challenge their pastor. So they can challenge the people in the next church over. So they can actually make a stand. Because we've got to fortify the remnant. That's what we need to do. Not everybody is going to, go the right way. But how many times did God save a nation because of a few righteous people? Just a few. Just a few. And I seriously do not think, if you look at the American Revolution, you cannot tell me that the divine hand of providence was not on that revolution. You had a bunch of farmers and blacksmiths and lawyers with squirrel rifles fought the world's greatest military empire and won.
Yeah.
Right? They were lunatics. But they won. All the stories about the famous fog that came down on New York Harbor just at the right time to save George Washington's troops. The bullets that went through George Washington's tunic and through his hat, but never through him. There were many, many miracles in that war. Many. And look what it gave us. Well, we're at such a time again, folks. And God was willing to help the American revolutionaries because they stood by his laws and his principles, and they stood on faith and courage against tyranny. They stood for their religious liberty. They did everything. They laid their lives, their honor, their sacred, their fortunes, everything. They put it on the line for what they believed in. So I believe God was pleased by that. Well, we have got to be in a similar position today, folks. Not everybody has to stand up, but a heck of a lot more do than are now. So, do you really think God wants this country lost? No. Do you want to be standing saying, yeah, sorry about that, God, we lost this great country on my watch? Because I had a lot of responsibilities, and I was in the golf club, and I had a lot of tournaments to play. And look, I have family who really loved their trips to the Virgin Islands, and I had a business to run, and I'm sorry about losing your country. I'm sorry about selling my kids into slavery, but can I please come to heaven anyway? We've got to face reality here, folks. We were given laws to live by. We have a blueprint, the Bible, how to live our lives. We have the Constitution, how to run our country. Both inspired out of the Bible. They go together. If you support one, you should support the other. And both of them are in danger now. The Democrats get back in again, the Bible will be declared a hate speech document. You mark my words on that. The Equality Act that the Democrats have already passed through Congress, if that gets passed through the Senate and signed off by Biden, that means LGBTQ rights trump your Christian conscience. So you'll be a little church out in in Wilmar, Minnesota, or wherever you are, and a gay couple will come to your door and say, we want to get married in your church, sir. And you'll say, well, no, that is not according to our beliefs. You'll have to go elsewhere. And then you'll get hit with a $5 million civil rights lawsuit from the Department of Justice. You tell me that will not happen. But how many Christian pastors in this country are actively campaigning against that? Any that you know of? This will destroy the church in America if it's allowed to pass. Because it will compromise the conscience of every real Christian in the country. And how many pastors are fighting back against it? I can't think of hardly any. Well, there's a few. Yes, there are always a few. But it should be every pastor. How many pastors are out there actively opposing abortion? Roe v. Wade got thrown back not because of pastors, because of hardcore, dedicated lay people, Catholics, Protestants alone, who've been fighting that battle for 30 years with very little help from the mainstream churches in this country. They did it. Here's the thing. Here's one more thing I'll say. 1956, Lyndon Johnson, who was then a senator from Texas, passed an amendment to the tax code called the Johnson Amendment. And what it said was, you cannot endorse candidates from the pulpit or you will lose your tax-free status. And every cowardly pastor in the country said, oh, we can't talk about anything political now. That's great. Because I don't have to upset half my flock every Sunday. And so a few years after that, they banned prayer in schools. And then they passed Roe v. Wade. Had they not passed the Johnson Amendment first, you'd think they could have got rid of prayer in schools and passed Roe v. Wade. They bought off the churches with their own money. When you take that tax-exempt status, you are beholden to the government. See, one reason the German Christians didn't stand up, because every pastor got a stipend from the government. So do you think they're going to oppose Hitler when Hitler's paying their salary? You cannot, if you're a Christian church, you cannot be taking money from the government. Ever. Ever. Because when you do, you are compromising your message and your independence. But many churches are taking these faith-based initiatives. They're getting into refugee resettlement and all these things, government contracts. They all become social agencies and socialist social agencies at that. That's what's going to save this country is the small independent churches, the little home churches, the grassroots Christians is what's going to save this country. Because the leadership of the mainstream denominations has been completely compromised for decades. Just like the leadership of the GOP has been completely compromised for decades.
Amen.
We're going to be saved politically by the grassroots conservatives, and we're going to be saved by the grassroots Christians. That's who's going to save us. So I'll call it quits there. I've gone on a long time, but I hope this has given you a different perspective of A, what's happening in the churches, and maybe what can be done to turn it around. Because it's got to be turned around, folks. You know, there's no point listening to a meeting like this on a Tuesday night and going to a socialist church on a Sunday. Right? You've got to look at your church and see what they're teaching. And you've got to be, if the pastor's off track, get them back on track. And if you can't get them back on track, find a church where they are teaching it. Because this is not a social club, people. Social clubs don't get you to heaven. The salvation's worth a lot more than the fact that the pastor is a really nice guy and he's your friend. You know, and there's more than that. Are they preaching it as it's written? And are they putting it into practice and making a stand? Two factors you've got to look at. Are they teaching the truth? And are they living the truth? Because if they really believe, they will do. If they're just paying lip service, they will not do. So this is what you've got to understand. What we're doing in our movie, we're going to have a website that's going to have every zip code in America. We're going to have a list of sound churches. So you can look at, you move to Minnesota, you move to Wisconsin, you can look in your zip code and say, well, where's the good church here? So you don't have to waste your time going to 9 woke churches to find a good one. So I hope this has been interesting for you. I hope it made you look at things differently. Please order a copy or two of the movie. We charge $20 each for them. If you don't want to get it tonight, go on to enemieswithinchurch.com. You can download it. But as you know, all the movies went to Rochester, New York. They'll be here tonight, and Wes will personally deliver them to you. Because he just loves doing stuff like that. So please get on. I also have my book, White House Reds, which gives you the communist background of Biden and Buttigieg and all these people that are now running your government. We're in a revolution, folks. It's not just the church, it's the government too. And we've got to make sure this election upcoming goes very, very well, because if it doesn't, we lose this next election. Here's my suggestion. Buy yourself some really good earplugs. Okay? I'll tell you why. Because you might end up in the same cell as me, and I snore something wicked. Right? Yeah. Thank you. So, thank you very much. Are there any questions, comments, criticisms, challenges? I'm up for all of it. I'll get this all.